I'm a little worried. My uncle's son is here. I don't know, Tim, what that makes us. Anyway, he came up to me before and he said, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Ruth says you're funny. And so he actually said I was also good, but funny is what we're going to talk about. So anyway, I was then mentally scrolling through my slides and I'm like, Tim, I don't have a lot of humor this morning. And I realized this probably came from something that happened with my wife about 6 months ago. And she asked me not to tell the story, but she's at camp and what happens at Westside. And, So anyway, about 6 months ago, I told a joke, and I think it was about her, to her. And I don't remember the joke, but she said to me, your problem is you're not as funny as you think you are. And that hurt. Like, literally, I thought if my first career didn't work, I could do improv, and so she's just like knife in the heart, and I told her that, and in her defense, she goes, well, if that's the worst thing I've ever said about you, I feel pretty good. Right? So anyway, I don't know if that's like curtailed the humor in my stories, but anyway, I have one or two. We're continuing in Nehemiah today, and I have Nehemiah 3. And the title of the sermon is Revival to Ruin. Nehemiah 3 to me was a difficult chapter. I was actually whining to Hank Warren about why the elders assigned me Nehemiah 3. So Nehemiah 3 is actually just a list. It's literally 32 verses of a list of people who built the wall, the section of the wall they built, what they did for their professions. That's it. There's not a single note of encouragement. There's not an admonition. There's not a command. It's just a list. It's literally like in modern parlance, if Nehemiah was an article written or something, it would say, see Appendix 1 for the Excel spreadsheet. That's what Nehemiah 3 is. So anyway, we're not going to read all of Nehemiah 3. So if you're through the Bible, it's like, I don't have to read Nehemiah because they'll just read it all for me on Sunday mornings. You're going to have to read Nehemiah 3 on your own. I'm going to read the first 2 verses and the last verse, okay, of Nehemiah 3. Here it is. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work. And they rebuilt the sheep gate, which they dedicated, and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Hanabal. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zachar, son of Imri, built next to them. And then it keeps going like that for 29 more verses until we get to verse 32. And between the room above the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and merchants made repairs. So we started at the sheep gate, we ended at the sheep gate, and the entire thing is a list of families. Okay, so here are the nuts and bolts of it. 220 acres. Joe said that 2 weeks ago, so I'm continuing where Joe Xavier left off. Joe, I couldn't actually find the 220, but Joe's a detailed guy, so we're going to trust Joe on the 220 acres, I think you said. There are 10 gates. I counted there 50 or more families, and there were many, many more people involved in this. There were all sorts of professions involved in it. It's funny, the King James, I think, says apothecaries. And then I think it was the NLT or something called the same group of people perfume makers. And I'm like, if I would prefer to be thought of as a pharmacist than a perfume maker, but anyway, so those guys probably wanted the King James version. All right, all the way around, individuals, groups, all sorts of people made it. They worked mostly in front of their own homes, and they made, and they had opposition. That's the nuts and bolts of kind of what you learn in Nehemiah 3. So, I have probably read about 10, so I'm kind of flailing around trying to think about where I'm going with this sermon. And I probably read 10 commentaries. Terry Harris, I put them all back in the library this morning. And I listened to probably about the same number of sermons. And the themes are all over the place. You can see them. I'm not going to list them all. I would note 3, 4, and 5, communication, coordination, and commitment was a single pastor who I thought his alliteration was wonderful. Somebody else gave a sermon on the importance of record keeping, which I did not think would be a scintillating sermon for this group. All right, boundaries sounded slightly interesting to me, but I didn't want to really go there. And then one commentator said Nehemiah 3 was intrusive and unnecessary and detracted from the rest of the book. Well, since we think all scriptures is inspired and profitable, I didn't want to go with that sermon, right? Okay, so I ended up just kind of violating the Ironside rule and going my own way. Why am I having, okay, so here's where I'm going with this sermon. I'm just going to lay it out here at the front end. So when I read Nehemiah 3, I think this is a leader's dream, a church leader's dream. If you're a supervisor at work, your dream. If you're a coach of a sport, like where everybody gets involved, everybody's passionate. We have all of these people from all walks of life, men, women, families, outsiders, insiders, they're all coming together and they're doing this project, right? And I thought, can we draw what motivated these people, as Kennedy said 2,500 years ago, what motivated them to come together and in 52 days build a wall around a large town? Can we pull from that and say, can the same types of passions motivate us today? So I'm going to draw a metaphor between the motivations that they had and what should maybe motivate us in this local community, in this local church community today. That's where I'm going with it, okay? And from my perspective, the Israelites back then, had 2 primary motivations. And Jim Williams said these same 2 things when he spoke. They were motivated from a feeling of vulnerability and lack of safety. And they were motivated, and Jim used the word reproach. They were motivated that they were no longer in God's will and under God's blessing, and they were not participating in the work of God, or they had failed to do that as the nation of Israel collapsed. So we're going to look at those 2 things as how they apply to us. All right, first, we are going to talk about the Israelites were motivated to create and sustain a safe environment. All right, so this is taking from Nehemiah 4. Here's what they were saying about the area around them. Also, our enemies were saying, before they know or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them, and we will put an end to all their work. Then the Jews who lived near them, that means the other tribes that were outside of Jerusalem, came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack you. So remember, the Israelites that had come back to Jerusalem were in a very vulnerable environment. They were in a very isolated place from the armies of the king Artaxerxes, who seemed to have some sort of commitment to protect them. They were out alone in the tribal lands, and they were living in this town that basically had no protection. And Joe mentioned 2 weeks ago about the concept of, like, if you were living in a house that had no doors, how would you feel? And it made, Martha and I both talked about it, because about 25 years ago, we had a break into our house. And it's kind of weird, because so I had a surgery, and I was sleeping on the couch in the family room, and a guy came in through our laundry room door that we had left unlocked. And the way the couch was oriented, you couldn't see that I was on it. It was like facing the hallway where he came in. And I was sleeping on the couch, and I have no idea what woke me up, but something woke me up, and I sat up. And he's like closer than you. He's like right there. And I don't know who was more scared, him or me, right? Because he had no idea I was there, and I had no idea he was there. And he went running back down the hall, and I'm like, Martha, Martha, come out and beat him up. No, I didn't say that, right? Right? So anyway, here's the point. That happened 25 years ago. I would say 99 days out of 100, we lock our laundry room door every night before we go to bed. That left a scar, right? That's how these guys, imagine living in an environment where you are completely inundated with the idea of people that do not like you are going to come in and take you over. Okay, so they had this passion for safety. They felt vulnerable. They had a passion for safety. This is just a little aside, and I'm sorry the picture's a little bit small on this, but this is just for the archaeology geeks, okay? So part of me wonders, what's this wall look like and all that kind of thing. So this is a pit. So they're not sure they have found Nehemiah's wall. But several prominent archaeologists, in fact, the head archaeologist in Jerusalem about 20 years ago said, we have found the wall. And there's a little, so the big stepped area is not the wall. There's a little yellow triangle, which I told Martha. Martha's my IT. I said, that's not big enough. They can't see that. But the little triangle just to my right, your left, there's a little triangle that's Nehemiah's wall, right? They think Nehemiah's wall. Kathleen Kenyon and Elliot Mazar, the two prominent, said they think this is it. So just so you know, they didn't build like that little picture I showed you earlier where it's a perfectly straight wall in there. They were filling in the rubble. The big stepped area, just to give you a perspective, that's one of the foundational parts of David's palace. So that would be a different story, but he clearly was living in a hot spot there, okay? Here's the close-up. So the stepped area, and then that woman way up in your left-hand corner maybe is standing on Nehemiah's wall, right? So they think that's what Nehemiah's wall looked like. So they were vulnerable. They wanted to clear the rubble and fill in the wall. Okay. How does this apply to the church? I'm going to make two applications to this church, and I want to give a little bit of qualifiers to this part of it. So I want to talk about that we should have that same feeling of passion to maintain a vibrant community here and to sustain it. And I want to give you three qualifiers, though. When I talk about the church, okay, first of all, and when I talk about this idea of we're going to create a space of safety, I do not want you to think of fortress church. Like we're going to build these walls, we're going to get inside, and we're not leaving. Okay, we're just going to do the fortress mentality. That is not the notion of walls at all. And I will tell you, it's not the notion of walls down through history. One of my favorite things to do as an amateur military historian, and I have read tons of books on ancient and near ancient military history, walls throughout history. So the great walls, Carthage and Constantinople and the Peloponnesians, Athens. The Spartans didn't believe in walls. They thought they were for girls, but that's why there are no Spartans now, right? The great medieval cities and forts of Europe, right? Walls were there, but they were there offensively as well as defensively, right? Like inside the walls were where the armor and the weapons were built. Inside the walls were where the food was provided for soldiers going out. Inside the walls were where the combatants came that were injured to recover and be fixed up, right? Inside the walls were where the ships were built. Inside the walls were where recruitment happened to get more soldiers to go out into the field. So the first qualifier is this is not like I'm not going to advocate here for a fortress church. Second qualifier is my metaphor here is they're building physical walls. The church is not these walls, right? We all know this. The church, when I am talking about the church here, I'm talking about a community of Christians, a community of believers. Not these four walls when I talk about the church. Andy Stanley, church happens in circles, not pews. I completely agree with him on that. More of the church happens outside of these walls than happens inside of these walls, right? So it's the community of believers. And 3, while I'm mostly talking about a local congregation like ours, I realize many of us are involved in Christian community outside of our local church. Like many of you are involved with missions organizations outside the church. I used to be a part of the Christian Medical Society. I used to be a part of the Gideons. My wife's in a neighborhood Bible study. She's the only woman that goes to Westside in that Bible study, and she's been tremendously blessed, right? So I'm talking, but I would say most of the work I'm talking about should be happening, or much of the work should be happening through the local church. All right. The number one reason why the church is a place of safety: we are a community of truth. We are a community of truth, all right? So George Orwell said, the very concept of objective truth is fading out of the world. And he died in 1950, so I can't imagine what he would say now, right? So we are in a whirlwind of half-truths and deception right now. I think it's been elevated through social media and all the ways we get our news and truth right now, but y'all know, I mean, Martha was literally showing me an Instagram reel yesterday, and she's like, I don't know if this is real or not. Like, I don't know if this is AI. Everybody in the world has an opinion. Everybody in the world thinks their opinion has equal weight with regard to the truth. Everybody thinks they know what's right, and you can hear anything you want out there, right? And from a worldly perspective, that's to be expected. I put the verse up, it's the next verse, I think. Wait, it's this verse. You see it, this is Jesus talking. You are children of your father, the devil. Don't worry about that part, that's a different sermon. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. I never read this verse like this before. When he lies, he speaks his native language. So think about for those of you that are multilingual, think about when you go back to your native language. That's the language you are the most confident in. That's the language you're the most articulate in. That's the language that's the most persuasive, that if you want to persuade somebody of something, you want to do it in your native language. And what Jesus is saying here, who knows the devil, who's met the devil, right? That is his native language. He is articulate, confident, and persuasive with lying. So the world is fraught with untruth, as opposed to us, the church. And I want to speak to two groups here. I want to speak if you're not a Christian for a moment, and then I want to speak to those of us who follow Jesus. So as opposed to the church, in which when you are sitting in here and when you are participating in conversation with a community of Christians, you are in the presence, as long as we're speaking the truth as in Scripture, of absolute certain truth. And in that place is a place of safety. Dallas Willard said, the truth allows us to successfully live in reality, right? When you hear the truth as Jesus has said it and as the Bible has said it, you are in a place of safety. You are not in a place of wondering, is that true or not? And to the unbeliever, I'm going to say this. So H.G. Wells says, if there's no God, it's the least important. If there's no God, nothing matters. If there is a God, he's all that matters. And he's exactly right. And so to a non-Christian, I'm going to say this. If you're not sure there's a God, if you don't know, or if you don't think there's a God, then, do what you want. Lie, cheat, steal, fulfill all your base pleasures, because in 3 generations, your molecules will be taken back into the soil and no one will remember your name. If there is a God, how you respond to him, what he wants from you, how you can relate to him is the most important thing in the world. And so if you're not a Christian, I'm going to give you, and I'm a little cautious always about recommending specific websites, but I'm going to recommend one. There's a website called hillfaith.org. Hillfaith.org. It is a ministry that tries to reach out to the 12,000 staff members that work with congressmen, senators, the executive office, everything that goes on in Capitol Hill. I think it's an amazing idea because these are people that are influencing policy, laws in America, and this ministry specifically reaches out to them. And it's apologetics, it's kind of convincing people they're God. I cannot recommend it enough, and I'm sure there's some quibble we might have with something they say, but not very much. They just posted on the 7th of July. If you're not a Christian, actually, if you are a Christian, I recommend you watch it. It's a 60-minute video. This guy, Josh Timonen, he was the right-hand man of Richard Dawkins. If you don't know Richard Dawkins, since Jay Gould died, Richard Dawkins is the voice of the new atheists in America. I just read an article from one of the top hedge fund managers in America, and he said one of the most significant books he read was from Richard Dawkins. So he is a profound, and this guy, Josh Timonen, who was born in Hillsboro, Oregon, he did all his IT. He traveled around the world with him. He went to the Galapagos with him, made videos. So for a long time, he was an atheist. And then he and his wife, you should watch the video again, 60 minutes. He moves to Texas, and they decide to go to a church because they like the aesthetic of the church. That's it. Right? He kind of goes, we never thought we would believe in Jesus. We just kind of thought the culture was cool, right? So they go to this church and he becomes a Christian. And if you are somewhere in your journey towards believing in God, I cannot recommend his little thing. So go to hillfaith.org, look up testimonies, you'll see Josh Timonen, local guy as well. So one of the reasons this is a place of safety, if you are a non-Christian, is it will walk you towards how to have a right relationship with God. If you are a Christian, again, a place of safety, because Jesus tells us a couple different things, and I'll just run through them very quickly. Number one, Jesus clarifies common truth or common knowledge for us, right? So Jesus says things that we all go, well, duh, of course. Right? So what kind of things would Jesus say that we go, yeah, that makes sense. So he says, judge not, lest you be judged. And we're all like, yeah. For those two of you that don't play pickleball out there, let me explain one of the rules. The rule is the team that the ball's hit to gets to call whether the ball's in or out. All right? So you hit to me, I think the ball's out, you lose, right? If people call the lines tight, people judge me tight, I call their lines tight. It's just the way it is. If people don't call me tight, I'm a little looser on my call. Might have been in, might have been out. I'll say that one's in because they've given me the benefit of that. So that all makes sense. Jesus says something else. He says, when you go to a party, don't walk in and sit at the head of the table as if you deserve it. Because then you might be embarrassed when the host says, your seat's in the back. Rather, go to the back and then have the host say, oh no, come sit next to me. Right? Very, very clear common sense. Jesus says, you'll know a tree by their fruit. We agree with that. Rick and I were talking about apples just this morning. Rick knows we're not going to get apples from a pear tree, right? So Jesus says things that are common. Then Jesus says things that are a second thing that is very uncommon sense or very odd. So think about the Beatitudes. Happy are those who mourn. Well, there's an oxymoron for you. Happy are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. So how many of us watch something on and it's like, oh my gosh, I just wish justice was served. We're not happy at all. We're frustrated. Jesus says, happy are those that do that. Jesus says this. He says, if you try to save your life, you will lose it. But if you lose your life for me, you will save it. That's completely upside down, right? Or how about, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you won't have a part of me. So it's almost like those parts of common sense are Nothing that has to do with this world. It's almost like Jesus is talking about another world. And that's what Dallas Willard says in his book, The Divine Conspiracy, right? He's like, Jesus has introduced us to this entire different reality, the kingdom of God. And in the kingdom of God, it's more real than our current reality, and eventually it will supersede our current reality. But that's what happens. That's the truth of that kingdom. And Jesus is showing us that. So Jesus validates and clarifies our common sense, and he also talks about uncommon sense. And then finally, Jesus really, with Christians, there's one truth. It's follow me. It's follow me. Francis Schaeffer says, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly, Christianity is not a bunch of little truths, small t. He says it's one truth. It's that Jesus Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He embodies truth. And as a community of Christians, right, that's a safe place to be. And we ought to have a passion for maintaining that truth within this congregation. And we ought to have a passion for saying it to the world. All right. I am reading, this is another Goff reference. I'm reading the memoirs of Gaius Goff. So Gaius Goff, for those of you who don't know, is he older than you, Phoebe? He's old, because Phoebe's young. So Scott and Phoebe are Gaius's brother and sister, if I got this right. My mother will kill me if I get the... All right, now I got to find it. So I'm reading their memoirs, and this struck me. Here it is. So Gaius was a missionary to Newfoundland for years. Scott actually went up there for some summers, right, Scott? He had a boat. Gaius had a boat, and they would go all around the Newfoundland Labrador coast, and they would preach the gospel. And in his memoirs, Gaius tells this story. They sailed their boat into a little harbor, and they preached. And a man, after they preached, came on and said, can I come on your boat? And he tells the story. I have a hotel here, he began. And a number of years ago, my father, who was an ocean-going captain, came to live with us in his old age. He had gone to sea when he was a young and was a good captain, but he was a very wicked man, though. He would swear at his men, and anything that didn't go his way that he wanted, he was very evil about. In later years, he wasn't so bad, and after he retired, he came to live in my hotel. He was an angry and lonely old man. He had his own suite of rooms in my hotel so he could be by himself or with his friends. One day, I was walking down the hall past his room, and I noticed the door open a bit, and he was talking. I stopped for a look in, and to my surprise, saw my father down on his knees praying. That was very unusual, but even more so was what he was praying about and that he was praying out loud. He prayed what the title is. Oh God, my ship is going on the rocks and I can't get it around. Then he stopped for a minute. Again he prayed. Oh God, my ship is going on the rocks and I can't get her around. After that, he got up, lay down on his bed, turned his face towards the wall. When he was finished telling the story on the boat, one of the men asked, did he get his ship around before he died? The storyteller answered briefly, I wish I knew. The man then was asked, how about you? Where will you go? Again he answered, I wish I knew. And I misquoted Gaius. I'm irritated. So just so you know, my wife does all my IT work. And so since she had to go to camp, I had to finish my sermon yesterday. And then I was reading it this morning, and she wasn't there to make any adjustments. So I misquoted up there what Gaius wrote. It is really important ahead of time to prepare for heaven. Here's the money statement. When one gets older, it is not easy to change one's thoughts and beliefs. And that had never really resonated with me. I'm like, Well, I'm a Burger King guy, but I can flip to McDonald's any day. Well, if you eat at Burger King your whole life, it's going to be hard to go to McDonald's, right? And that's what he's saying. Like, if you're inculcated in bad truth, it is hard when we get old to make the flip. I had a friend whose mom was an atheist her whole life, and he converted to Christianity, and then he went and tried to talk to his mom, and she said, I just feel like it'd be kind of not right for me to change my mind now, right? So my point of this is we should be passionate as the Israelites for their physical wall, to sustain and promote this community of truth. Okay, number one, and I have two more points, but I'm late. I'm going to go fast. Number two, we should be motivated to create and sustain a safe environment, the church, because we are a community of love. Okay, and I'm going to define this very quickly, then we're going to quickly go on. My definition for love: we hope for the best for everyone around us. We hope for the best for the people in the community, and we try as best we can to help them achieve it. I know that's a very superficial definition of love. That's the cookies on the bottom shelf, as Arden would say. But for this talk, I think Dick, in a couple weeks, is going to talk more about love. At least the title of the sermon is that, Dick. So I'm not going to. But here's the thing. Look around this room. Everybody in this room who's a Christian should hope for the best for you and work to help you achieve that best. Everyone in this room. Where else can you say that? Hopefully you can say that about your family. Hopefully you say your mom and dad hope for your best and work for it. If you're a kid, you hope for the best for your mom and dad and work for it. There's almost no other place on the planet where you should be able to look around the room and confidently say, everybody here hopes for the best for me and helps me achieve it. It will not happen at your work. It will not happen on the pickleball court. It will not happen at school, right? This is that. This is it. And I said this before from the pulpit. That doesn't mean I like you all. I don't know if I like you all. That's not the command here, right? Like is an affection. Like is an affection. It's very hard for affection. It has nothing to do with like, right? Now, I'll say this. If I liked you, it's easier to hope for your best and try to help you achieve it. It's not part of the actual equation, though, okay? Just think about how precious it is. Think about the fact that you can be authentic and transparent. Think about the fact that you can be vulnerable about your failures. Think about the fact that you can celebrate your successes and hope no one is envious about you, right? Think about the fact that you can be hurt and wounded and come into this environment and people will help heal you, right? That is so precious. That is a place of safety. So number one, the church, we should work to sustain it as a place of safety, because it's a place of truth and it's a place of love. Okay, we're going to go very quickly here. Number two, the Israelites were motivated to participate with God in his work. All right, very quick. This is Nehemiah's prayer. Herb covered this. In the prayer, he says, basically, that he and the Israelites recognize they were outside of the plan of God. They want to confess their work and confess their sin and get back right. So if you look at the highlighted, if you return to me, this is Nehemiah praying. He's reminding God, he said that if you return to me and obey my commandments, then even if your exiled people are in the furthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them back to the place that I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. Okay, I want you just to remember, and I wrote something down, but I'm not going to read it. 500 years before this little thing happened that we're talking about today, the city of Jerusalem was at the zenith of power, right? Solomon was king. Literally, the Bible says he sent out his ships. They brought back apes and peacocks and gold and silver. Solomon built this temple adorned with gold and precious jewelry, right? In Kings, it says silver was so common it wasn't even worth much in the city. So people, kings and princes, Queen of Sheba, but all people came from the ends of the earth. So they had this huge, they were the lords of the Middle East, the Israelites. And then over 400 years, they were outside of God's will for most of the time, and they come back to Jerusalem, and it's a hovel. It's rubble. It's crummy little homes, right? And they look at that and they say, we want to get back into the presence of God and do his work. Okay, now I'm going to go really quick. I know, my mom keeps telling me, your biggest problem with sermons is you talk too fast. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to do about it. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of prophecy. We don't do much prophecy in this church. Few of us like prophecy. I'm in Garth Page's care group. And someone came up to me a little while ago and said, when I said I'm in Garth Page's life group, it's a men's life group. And they go, let me guess, you're either studying Daniel or Revelation, because Garth loves prophecy. And I said, no, we're in the Psalms, because the only thing Garth loves more than prophecy is emotional worship. Now, for those of you that know Garth, you know that's complete sarcasm. Garth was here earlier. I was going to poke him on that. Anyway, we're going to do a little bit of prophecy. So listen very carefully. Listen very carefully here. There was a guy named Daniel. He lived about 100 to 150 years before Nehemiah. He was a prophet. One of his most famous prophecies was this prophecy that involved 70 weeks, and it talked about the rebuilding of the holy city and the cutting off of the Messiah. All right? This is before Nehemiah was born. And he basically said, in 490 years after Jerusalem gets rebuilt, the Messiah will be cut off. That's what the prophecy was, okay? We know exactly the year that Nehemiah went to Artaxerxes and said, I want to rebuild Jerusalem. It was 445 BC, because his dad Xerxes was Xerxes, for those of you that watch the 300, the Spartans, the Gates of Fire, Thermopylae, Xerxes was the Persian king that went there and defeated the Spartans. He was assassinated by one of his generals in 465 BC. Very famous. It's outside of the biblical. That date is known. Nehemiah 1 says, so we know Artaxerxes ascended to the throne 465 BC. Nehemiah 1 says, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes' reign, I started this. That's that side of the screen. See? Decree to rebuild Artaxerxes, March 14th. Now, we also know, actually Nehemiah says the month of Nisan. But I looked at so many of these. It's a little too tight, because nobody really knows the exact year Jesus was born. But the point of this is, from 445, 490 years, 32 AD, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So here's my point. These people that were rebuilding this wall, they maybe knew this prophecy. I don't know how much they know about it. They just said, we want to get back involved in the work of Jesus. And they started the timeline that ended up with the most significant event in the history of the world. And the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Historically, it's not in the Bible. Remember I mentioned the sheep gate? Jesus enters Jerusalem through the sheep gate on his way to be crucified. And that gate is mentioned here. And it's symbolic. It's kind of, I don't know if it's a legend, but historically that's what people say. These people started it. Here's my point. Second to the last slide. Okay. You and I, through the community of the church, this is the primary vehicle that we are participating in the work of God. It's not the only one. Like I said earlier, there are other ones. This is the primary one, all right, that we are participating in the work of God. You don't know. We don't know how to. I told my wife, because she headed out camp, I said, you know what? Some girl out there might become the future president of the United States, going to Eagle Fern Camp, hearing about Jesus. VBS, say, we don't know, right? If you are participating, that on that side of the screen, is the Westside Bible Chapel homepage service part. You can go on that. You don't know. Serving coffee in the back, ushering, setting up stuff. These people that were up here doing this, deacons and women's ministry. participating in the work of God. We should have a passion for it. Like, we could be impacting history. And here's the thing, even if we're not, I put up there 1 Corinthians 15. And what it says is, your work will not be in vain. Now, I have to tell you, that doesn't necessarily mean all of our work here on this earth, because 1 Corinthians 15 is about heaven as well, right? But what it is saying is participating in the work of God here will not be in vain. It will be recognized in heaven. All right, last slide. So here's the thing. I think because we are a community of safety through truth and love, and because we are participants, we ought to have a passion for sustaining the church, keeping it growing, keeping it going. I think somebody else mentioned this, my last little story. You know, I'm quite into the thing Alone. People watch Alone. Anybody? Am I the only one that watches Alone? Ben Aaronholt. All right, good job, Ben. The Bens, Ben Otto and Aaron Holt. So it's this survival show where they take 10 people, they dump them into a harsh wilderness, and they give them 10 things. They can only take 10 things. And whoever survives the longest makes $500,000, right? So they go through all that. They starve to death, and they stick themselves with knives and all sorts of things. So most of them bring fire. They know, like, fire's important. So they bring fire. A few noble souls are confident they can make fire without bringing a mechanism to make fire. Like that guy up there, right? And I actually don't know anyone that's gone home by not making fire, but a few of them, it takes some time, like days, to make fire. And you can sense the desperation, the increasing desperation, because fire is everything, right? Fire sterilizes their water, makes their food edible, keeps the wild animals away, keeps them warm, right? Fire is like, they all say, if I can't make fire, I'm tapping, right? They all say that, right? And you sense the desperation is like, and then they cry, and then they try again. And anyway, and then they get this little tiny fire. And they're doing this little thing and this, and finally they get fire. And then they're like committed to not letting the fire go out, right? Totally committed. I got to keep the fire going. That's the way I think we should have some passion for here. Like, and the analogy breaks down. A, we're not alone. Look around the room. B, it's God that keeps the fire going. But he wants us to participate in keeping the fire going. We should have that same energy and passion to work to keep the fire going.